Welcome to Movies and More with Stacy Hovis and John Brandon. Every week, Stacy and John come to you with the latest movies in the marketplace. Media experts Stacy and John take you to the movies and tell you what's hot and what's not in the media world. Stacy and John host conversations about the topics in the films. Their mission is to guide you through the media world. Okay, audience, here's Stacy and John.
Hello and welcome to Movies and More. We're here today with, first off, a good friend of mine and also a professional attorney that deals with patents and copyrights and all manner of intellectual property and that sort of thing. And we're going to talk to him in just a few minutes. But before we get started, I wanted to mention an absolutely fantastic musical presentation that I watched Sunday on CBS, and it was a Grammy salute to the Beach Boys. And of course, being a baby boomer, I grew up listening to those wonderful people that was just a part of all of Americana, and they of course lost a few of their members, and I guess for all intents and purposes, they're pretty much retired from performing. But there was a whole bunch of folks that did their songs that night, and it was really kind of a struggle because on Fox there was a NASCAR race, and of course I'm a big NASCAR buff, and it was a challenge. What was I going to watch? The Beach Boys or NASCAR? Well, I got to tell you, it was kind of a close first, second kind of a thing. But at any rate, I enjoyed it very much. And what I wanted to point out was that that show will be repeated again on Paramount Plus, streaming channel. And I tried to look it up before I came on the air, but what I'm told is that sometime, probably by the end of the month, it'll be seen, or at least you'll have access to it. So anyway, God bless the Beach Boys and everything they stood for. So moving on to our guest, Kevin Kircher. As I mentioned, he's a patent attorney, a copyright attorney, and intellectual property attorney. And he's got really an incredible background. He came out of college with really, I guess, 2 degrees, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And of course, to be a patent attorney, I'll let him explain all the nuances and finances that you have to get to that level. But anyway, he started out working for the Caterpillar Corporation in Peoria, Illinois. And he started out not as an attorney, but as an engineer. And after he left those folks, he went out into the wonderful world of legal representation and practiced his discipline of law. And then eventually he returned back to Caterpillar, but not as an engineer, but as a patent attorney. I'll let him talk about that. So anyway, without further ado, welcome to our show, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stacey. It's really a privilege and honor to be here.
The pleasure is ours. First, as I walk through your bio, and I've known you for a while, and I got to tell you, until I did a little research, I didn't realize that you probably busted your buns in college. I got the sneaky suspicion that you weren't a party animal in college.
Yeah, I'm afraid not. No, it's just, to be a patent attorney, you have to actually have like an engineering degree because you're the person that's the kind of next to the inventor. You're the next person that's to know as much as the inventor because you have to describe the whole invention, describe how it works, what components are there, and so it's a fascinating thing. So I originally started out. I received an industrial engineering degree. I had 3 years of electrical engineering, but I wanted to work with people. And so I ended up getting an industrial engineering degree and went to work for Caterpillar up in Aurora, Illinois, worked in robotics. And so it was kind of a fascinating field. So I was in charge of doing the pricing for people bringing in the robotic systems and doing the layout and then actually supervising the installation and training the people involved. And so it was a fascinating field, and a lot of patents came across my desk in dealing with different parts of the robot. And so it just looks fascinating. Some of my friends were going to the University of Chicago for their MBAs, and it just seemed like in engineering you needed another degree. It seems like no matter if you become successful in engineering, you end up with doing business and supervising, knowing financial information, things like that. And so law seemed like a fascinating field, and I was fascinated with with the law. And so that's what I ended up doing. And so I ended up going back to school after it was about 2.5 years. I'm going back to University of Missouri, Columbia, where I received my undergraduate. And I'm going to law school there. And so when I graduated, I worked for a small law firm here in Clayton. But it was so small. A lot of the disputes were settled right away because the clients were, very small clients. And so I had an opportunity to go work for Milliken and Company in South Carolina. And so it was a real broad job. I was in charge of all the electronic, electromechanical, mechanical inventions coming out of research, but also all the commercial type work. And so I actually got exposed to a lot of different things, trademark law, as well as even dealing with media issues, dealing with celebrity endorsements and like movie production, giving rights and things like that. So it was a great experience. So I got to travel all over the world, be involved in supervising litigations in England and things like that on various types of patent issues. And it was really fascinating. I really enjoyed it, definitely. And so that's, but when I was there at Milliken, I realized that in patent law, you really needed to have something tied in that's more tied into inventorship rather than industrial. And so electrical, biotech, chemistry, et cetera, or mechanical are the types of degrees. And so I had only a year to go on my electrical. And so I finished that up from the University of North Carolina. So I ended up with both degrees. So no, I'm sad to say I was not a party animal. So.
Right. Well, I don't know disrespect because there are those of us that unfortunately I was kind of in that, are you going to go to the frat party? Are you going to hang out? Are you going to do your homework? I don't have 2 industrial degrees, just to let you know, but I've got some fond memories, and I made a lot of people rich, get me out of bad situations. But that's a whole nother story. We're not going to get into that. Now, you touch upon something that I thought we might chat about. Several years ago, actually, a friend of mine who recently passed away, Robert Blake, if you remember Bobby Blake.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, he was a really gifted actor.
Yeah, he was in the television shows, and he was one of the Little Rascals and so forth. He was endorsing a product called STP.
Right.
And STP was
an additive to the oil. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something. I have a little bit of a background, as you know, with high performance and engines and so forth. Well, this STP was supposed to, Andy Granatelli, the winner of the Indy 500, his cars were so. Well, he was the spokesman for STP.
Huh.
Did bunches of, Bobby Blake did bunches of commercials for him. The only problem was that when STP ran in the engine and got hot and cooled and hot and cooled and hot and cooled, whatever the material was, he added and it turned into like rocks.
Right.
An aggregate, which is not what you want from a lubricant. Okay.
Right.
Consequently, that stuff wound up breaking a lot of motors. I mean, if you were in the engine business at that time, which we were,
right.
and
it kind of ruined the
it destroyed the engine.
Recall, yeah.
And when you're an engine builder and you take an engine apart, you're kind of like Quincy MD. You're kind of like you do post forensics. You go,
right.
Aha, SCP. And I tell you what, he wound up getting, I guess, because he was their spokesman, and you can explain that, the litigation that was thrown at SCP and Andy Granatelli, it was unbelievable. Now, I'm told as a result of that, there was kind of a cottage industry that came out of that, which was product endorsement liability insurance.
Right.
Can you explain how that works a little bit if you're familiar with that?
Yeah, I guess the real key is, there's so many different types of endorsements and things like that. And the key is always, if you're endorsing, be sure you kick the tires, be sure you do the research, just kind of make sure you have a quality product, because even someone as extremely honest and forthright as Pat Boone,
right.
ended up in issues with that just because some of the claims weren't true. He had to end up settling. So it's literally, you can get insurance on almost everything in this day and age. It's famous celebrities, famous movie starlets have had their legs insured and things like that.
Yes.
If bad things happen. And so this is just another example where you could get insurance and things like that. And if you get the insurance, I guess the insurance companies will do some due diligence also for you.
Right.
So that would be kind of a helpful thing. But it's a common problem because a lot of times the celebrity endorser has a million things on their plate, and their agent may come in. Well, we've got this opportunity. It's just a quick it's a large money and a big check, and they don't really kick the tires. It seems like a fit. Like I'm sure Robert Blake knew his way around a car and things like that. And so,
but who knew? Who
Yeah.
knew it's from a mobile motor? But really, his value or his marquee value as a product presenter or endorser just went right down the tube. So that cost him severely. Now you mentioned another person. What I can tell you is that Kenny Wallace, who's a famous NASCAR driver, was a
Right.
national champion at one point. He was from Missouri, from Fenton actually,
right,
and he got involved with a company called U.S. Fidelity, which was a used car warranty insurance business. In other words, if your car broke down, it would get fixed. Well, the concept was great. They spent a ton of money for advertising. They gave him a lot of money. The only thing is, the people that were collecting the premiums didn't want to fix the car.
right.
And there were two brothers, I think it was. Anyway, they wound up going to jail. And there again, Kenny Wallace's.
Yeah, the Attorney General of Missouri, she actually went after him, and it was one of the biggest
right.
kind of schemes because they didn't uphold what they were doing, and
Right.
I think they have a new company out doing now. I'd be kind of doing that now, but you'd
Well, my familiarity was that having a automotive or high performance engine background,
right.
I was asked to be an expert witness on a couple of litigations. That was part of the Attorney General's thing to shut them down. So, we got to be careful about that. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah, it's always good to kind of know not only who you're endorsing, who you're doing business with. Kind of make sure you do some due diligence on your own.
Absolutely. All right. So, I got to ask you a question. You're familiar with Caterpillar,
Right.
and of course, they were one of Illinois' biggest employers. Had I don't know, like 10,000 employees or whatever, and of course, they've left Illinois and went to Texas. Did you ever imagine in your life that Caterpillar would ever leave Illinois?
This is going to be a surprising answer because I know how integral they are to Peoria and things like that. But actually, I wasn't super surprised. What happened is when I was at Milliken and Company, there's an opportunity to get back to kind of the Midwest. And I went to high school here in St. Louis. And I'm kind of a Midwesterner, and so I had the chance to go back. And I had some chemical courses I took, and so I did the chemical attorney quit, and so I was able to do that for a few months. And I got promoted up to, then I had 4 people working for me who were doing all the patents coming out of the technical services division. Then just less than a year later, I was in charge of 10 people dealing with all the agreements coming out of all the intellectual property agreements for Caterpillar. And so it was kind of a really exciting thing. So I got a chance to do that. And so, living there, it's like the reality is like Caterpillar, most of the companies, except for like Maui Jim and Sunglasses, most of the rest are suppliers or somehow tied in with Caterpillar. And so now there's still about 17,000 people. There are people working at Caterpillar, but the real key is there's kind of a drift. I know Tate and Lyle went from Decatur. And so there's kind of a movement just due to the fact that it costs so much. Like if you're an executive, you're making a good salary, and so there's like 3 to 4 hours of time in an airport. You have almost kind of wait time where you're coming in and out. You have customers coming in and out, and so there's a big trend to kind of doing that. It's also easier to get like executive and high level management people from larger metropolitan areas, and also there's numerous colleges, not maybe one college and things like that. And so it's kind of you have a much deeper talent pool. So there's a lot of reasons companies have been kind of doing that. And so I guess in 2017, they moved their headquarters up to Deerfield. And so, but now they just announced like middle of last year, they announced that they're actually going to Irving, Texas, kind of a suburb of Dallas.
Right.
And a lot of that, I imagine, I'm speculating, but the state income tax is a challenge. Like the state income tax is like it's close to 9.5. It's 9.5% in the state of Illinois, and it's like 0.75 in Texas, and even individuals, it's like no state income tax in Texas, and it's closer to like 4.5 or 5% in Illinois. So there's it's financially, if you're going to shareholders and attracting people and just the business climate and things like that, I can kind of, it makes a logical sense to me. And so they still have some plants in the area and stuff like that. So I can't say I'm super surprised. Yeah.
Well, I know the big thing was, it seemed like there was kind of like a showdown, between the governor and the corporate heads of Caterpillar, where they weren't, I think, some type of either cap on their taxes, on their state taxes, or some type of, I'm not going to really call them incentive, but just, hey, look, you're taxing us to death. This is Illinois, not California. Love us a little bit. And so I guess the governor just decided, oh, well, they'll never move, and,
Right.
But you know what? they kind of showed them who was boss, and they left town. That's what they did. That's what it come down to.
Right. Yeah. Well, I lived in the South, like Charlotte was bringing in, like 40,000 people every month, because they would actually go out. They'd have a team of top people, and they'd fly out to top execs, and they would actually bring in all these companies, and they would just make deals and things like that. And so, yeah, I'm sure because it's so tied in, and you do have a lot of sway. If you're in a smaller town, just like Milliken and Company and things like that in Spartanburg, South Carolina, you do have a lot of sway, in the local city. It's like if you want a road built and things like that,
right.
People do listen to you and things like that. But,
Sure.
And so, yeah, I'm sure, but nowadays everyone's looking for a deal, what deal they can have, and if they can get a better deal, and especially if you're a publicly held company like Caterpillar, you've got a duty to your shareholders.
Fiduciary responsibility.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, you've got a duty.
Well, if you think about like Texas and Florida, all kinds of people have left California for Texas,
Right.
and certainly New York for Florida. It's the same thing. And I guess the tax incentives, like you say, are the main thing.
Right.
And it's just unfortunate, because I a lot of the small mom and pop businesses, which still exist, believe it or not, around there, were dependent upon the restaurateurs and the clothing places and so forth. They were all dependent upon the big company, and when those jobs leave, the little guys are really left up to hurt. So
absolutely, and especially like the kind of the restaurants and the companies that kind of deal with kind of the executives, the Caterpillar executives and things like that. They developed their own really nice niche businesses,
yes.
And then they kind of would struggle, I'm sure, because now it's kind of more just a blue collar type town. And so I do feel bad for them, definitely.
So to be clear, it was a corporate offices or corporate, we'll say upper echelon, that actually left Peoria to go to Texas, correct?
Right, that's correct.
That's exactly what happened.
And so they still have their number of facilities, but they lost, like the rural one was a wonderful place to work. I enjoyed working there. I learned a lot, and just wonderful people and things like that. And they've actually sold that. That was up closer to Chicago, in Aurora. And so I love that place. But yeah, they kind of sold the property and kind of closed that down. A lot of it's with free trade, it's had repercussions kind of.
Right.
On the United States in a lot of different unforeseen ways, I guess.
One of the questions that I get hit all the time, because I'm involved with the screenwriting and teleplays and so forth, they talk about protecting oneself from what would be plagiarism, from somebody kind of stealing their content, their stuff.
Right.
And it's I kind of drew a parallel between copywriting, proprietary stuff like screenplays, teleplays, concepts for game shows or whatever. There's kind of a comparison between what would be a patent and a copyright, and then when we talk about patents, you have patents and you have patent pendings. And I know for a long time I was kind of confused about what the hell is the difference? I mean, a patent pending or a patent, either you got it or you don't, kind of thing, But being a pop drinker, a Coca-Cola, they've had a patent pending on their cans and bottles since I was a little kid.
Right.
Well, that's about 60 plus years. So I'm saying to myself, are they ever going to get a patent? Or why would someone like Coca-Cola continue to have a patent pending versus a patent? Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the patent world, patent pending means there's an patent application that's been filed, and yet it has not officially issued. And so it's just to let people put them on warning that something potentially could issue that could directly affect if you want to go in that same business, that it could be, if you're going to invest in a big bottling plant, that you'd be forewarned that there could be a potential issue and things like that. Kind of the ironic thing is like Coca-Cola actually has like 16-some thousand patents, believe it or not. That's on
Wow.
all different aspects. They have some sweeteners. They have a lot of it's on. They have an original like 1915 patent, a design patent on the bottle design, things like that. But the actual formula is actually still a trade secret. So they've kept that a trade secret forever. I imagine theoretically, with the chemists out there now, they could reproduce it, but that's probably the reason they went to New Coke and things like that, because they were, Coca-Cola was losing taste tests,
Right.
and
So Pepsi.
they kind of, and the reality is there's a huge emotional component, with Coca-Cola, where people love, they have fond memories and different things that you can't really take that away, and that's something that was probably overlooked as
More nostalgia than anything.
Oh, exactly. But
Right.
it's kind of a huge part of the customer
Sure.
base and things like that. And so that's probably why someone doesn't do a kind of a reverse engineering, it's called, and come up with it. So that's kind of the difference. While copyright can accrue, theoretically, you don't have to file the copyright application, but you do want it because you want to have the chance of statutory damages. You
Right,
want
sure.
to do that. You want to have the copyright application.
Well,
right-
how do you extend a patent pending? Obviously, they know how to do it because they've been doing it forever. So,
right.
what's
Well, I
involved
guess
with
one
that?
way they could do is that it might be on some ancillary aspect. You could maybe have it on a little sweetener you add to it or some ancillary
That
thing.
would extend
And
that.
that would still be patent pending theoretically. So that might be what they have up before. I'm not exactly sure what the patent pending's on. I mean, I've looked at a number of their patents. They have some recent ones, and even the sales displays and things like that. But they're patenting all the time. So if you still have one that's kind of in the works, you might, and they maybe just want to kind of keep it going since it's been, it's an over 100-year-old product, and kind of keep that kind of, it's part of the nostalgia of the bottle and things like that. They want to
Right.
keep it going. But that's kind of different there. So it's kind of a fascinating thing, because the actual, it's a trade secret itself is which means that can last in perpetuity. It's more powerful than a patent.
Right, sure.
A patent is only going to last for 20 years
Oh, really?
from filing. So it's got a real end to it.
Okay.
And so, even though you get some time when you're prosecuting the patent, you're able to claim some time back, but it's kind of a limited duration, things like that. Well, the trade secret can go on forever. So
Sure.
that holds true for, the Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe,
Right,
the
right.
Coke recipe.
The
and lots of
Colonel.
other- Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of them out there. And so
But
that's,
they're looking good. Absolutely.
so that's kind of like the differences
Yeah.
out there and things like that.
Now, when
And-
you were with Caterpillar,
Right.
it's part, I guess, in the latter part of your involvement with them as a patent attorney as such. Now, were you ever involved with cases where you actually went after people for infringement of things that you were doing? Was that part of what you did?
I actually was more on the prosecution side, and that's kind of what I do now. I got my law firm I'm with right now actually does
Name the law firm.
McKee, Voorhees, and Cease.
Okay.
And things like that. It's actually headquartered in Des Moines, but we
Yeah,
have
okay.
a number of people who actually
Right.
work here in St. Louis and
Right.
Columbia, Missouri, and things like that. And
Right.
so and so we have people specialized in that, and I was more specialized on not only doing the agreement work, all the intellectual property, so there could be strategic alliance agreements or
Sure.
different types of patent licensing agreements, and also anything from a simple NDA or materials agreement, things like that.
Mhm.
I was involved with that, but also all the patents coming out of research. So I had huge buyers, like a fourth of the department, 10 people actually.
So you were
patented-
like a top gun for Caterpillar. Don't mess with us, or we'll send Kevin after you.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I just, I was in charge of like
Sure.
10 people. We had a huge body of work that we actually
Right.
reported the number of patents we received for Caterpillar to
Sure.
the board. And so we patent a huge body of stuff. And so TSD is equivalent research and development. So
Yeah,
the
sure.
most complex patents and stuff
Mhm.
like that coming out of research, I was able to help patent with both a combination of in-house people and outside groups,
Right.
outside attorneys and things like that.
Well,
So-
that certainly had to be interesting. Caterpillar has been one of the staples of industry. They've actually been around, I think, since like the late 1800s, 1890 or so.
That's correct. Yeah, it's got a long history, and they've always been the premier earth moving equipment. So
Right, right.
it's a global
and they've
presence.
evolved
And,
or whatever,
right,
and,
right.
uh, we're coming down to where we've got about a minute or so left in our first half. And when we come back, I want to talk about my end of the business and John Brandon, because we're both screenwriters and developers of content for the entertainment business.
Right.
And we want to talk about some of maybe the do's and more importantly, the don'ts, protecting yourself, how you go through the process of litigating, and talk about some fairly well-known cases of what I'm going to call outright plagiarism that made a lot of news. And it's unfortunate that there are people out there that aren't necessarily always honest, and that's where your profession comes in, because folks like us who aren't quite as savvy as you are with the law need your love and support to get through to the next thing. So
Right.
we're going to be talking about that. I guess one thing too we want to cover too is like the length of a copyright, that type of thing. So we're going to go to break right now, and we're talking with Kevin Christian. Y'all stick around, and there'll be more movies and more. Thank you.
Do you want to become a radio show host, or do you want to create a radio show? Well, Dr. Stan Fine can help you to have your own radio show and put you on 100 cities daily across the U.S. And you can immediately start recording from a live radio studio. As a radio industry veteran, Dr. Stan Fine has 12 years of experience and has produced and hosted over 1,000 radio shows with over 10 million listeners. Dr. Stan Fine knows how to make this happen for you. He's a pro, and he can turn your dreams into a reality. Dr. Stan Fine will help you with everything from learning how to promote your show, develop a host persona, interview techniques, market your show on social media, teach you how to get guests and sponsors, and more. Dr. Stan Fine can put you on the air nationwide daily to 100 cities. If you're interested in making your dream come true, if you want to see how it all works, then give Dr. Stan Fine a call at 314-710-8413. That's 314-710-8413. You've got nothing to lose, and Dr. Stan Fine can help make your nationwide radio dreams come true. If you're looking for a new informative health and lifestyle show to gain knowledge and inspiration to help guide your journey to think, work, and live more powerfully, then you need to listen to Sage Advice with Melissa. Now, whether you're trying to improve your life from a mental, physical, or spiritual journey, Sage Advice with Melissa Coleman, CEO of Sage Skincare, delivers weekly advice from industry experts to provide you with insightful suggestions to allow you to thrive with a better quality of life. Melissa's mission: to guide you through the uncharted waters of health and wellness, and to give you a voice to help improve your life. So be sure to tune in to Melissa. You'll be glad you did.
Hey, listeners, saying thanks to your customers is nice and polite, but expressing your gratitude in memorable and ongoing ways can boost your business. At Promo Experts LLC, we exceed our customers' expectations. For over 20 years, our product knowledge and experience has helped them with their marketing initiatives and trade show graphics. We are happy to put that experience to work for you. Quality products, great customer service, and prices are our number one priority. We work with you to find unique, creative, and new ideas that fit your image and expectations, helping you build strong relationships with your customers. When you select Promo Expert as your help you to take a picture. For more information, contact Diane Carson, President, at 645-852. That's 636-458-5241. Experts help you to move your business brand beyond bland. Have you always wanted to write your own book but don't know where to start? Publishing Concepts, a publishing company located right here in St. Louis, offers everything from consulting, book printing, copyrights, ISBNs and barcodes, print book layout, ebook and iBook layout, graphic design, cover design, ghostwriting, typing and editing, distribution, marketing, and more for an affordable price. Visit publishingconceptsllc.com or just Google Publishing Concepts to get started today, or call 314-781-8880. That's 314-781-8880. Publishing Concepts. We help you sell more books.
And welcome back to Movies and More. I'm Stacy Hovis, and we're talking to Kevin Kirchner today. And Kevin is a patent, copyright, and intellectual property attorney. And we've been talking about the wonderful world of the boring stuff of law. But it's not so boring whenever someone is like trying to plagiarize your stuff. And that's why you have to have someone like Kevin on your side in the event that someone's going to plagiarize your stuff. So my next question, Kevin, deals with when someone writes, be it either a book or a screenplay or whatever proprietary stuff they put together, what's involved in their securing either a copyright, so they're protected going forward. Can you kind of walk through the steps of like whether they do it themselves personally or you provide the service for them, in any event, what the mechanics are of that deal?
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's actually in the copyright. It's much more straightforward. It's kind of like a 2-page form, so to speak. And right now, the optimal way of doing it is electronically. And so you fill out the form and kind of deals with all who's going to be contacted, who came up with the written work, when it was published, when it was created. All those things kind of bear standing with how long the copyright duration is and things like that. So it has to be kind of filled out right. And then basically there's a deposit made, which is, of course, your screenplay or whatever copyrighted work is done. And so you provide that in, and the advantage is it's relatively straightforward. I would advise getting an attorney involved because, number one, it's much less costly than, let's say, getting a patent. With a patent, you have your attorney has to draft it up. In some cases, it could be anywhere to a 100-page document, and for very complex cases, you have to describe exactly all the various permutations of the invention, how it works. But with the copyright, it's basically just kind of more of a form scenario, and so you're filling out the form, and you're making sure you're filing. The attorney's familiar with the filing process and things like that. So there's advantages there, but people do it on their own. And the key is you want to do that before you disclose that to anyone and things like that. And I would also be meticulous, like who you disclose it to, take records of it. If you have copies of it, you can substantiate, have maybe a backup system in your house so you can show to a court that it's unalterable. Let's say you back it up on maybe a cloud system or something where you can't go in and get the records, that someone, can't really alter it, that it would be chronologically intact. And so you couldn't go in your computer and mess around with it. And so that's the ultimate thing, because you can show when you came up with it, because you might have to prove, because once it hits, like it has in certain cases where it becomes a financial windfall, then everyone comes out of the woodwork a lot of times to claim they came up with it.
Right. So now you mentioned, I guess, a self-filed copyright is what you're talking about.
Right, copyright application.
Precisely. Now
right.
that's actually done with the, I think there's an copyright office in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's a
And
U.S.
there's one
copyright office and
right,
things
and there's
like that.
one in California too, I think. Okay.
Yeah, but the main ones, and you want to
DC.
file it electronically because you pay a lot more money
Right.
if you file it manually. It can be done, but it's
Right.
much more costly. It's nice to have the electronic because you can actually test it and see if make sure it's there. And typically,
Right.
if there's any issue, in some cases there's not. But I've had scenarios with like, let's say you have a design on a balloon and you get a copyright for it. It could be just a real simple design. It could get kicked back because it lacks creativity. It's just not enough. It looks like everything else that's already been done before. And therefore, they won't say there's not a modicum of creativity involved, and it'll get kicked back. And you'll know if it's kicked back and rejections are right away. You have much more of an electronic tie-in rather than getting something through the mail.
Right. So basically, you're doing just a few things, just to be clear. Number one, you're establishing authenticity and authorship. That's
Right.
really, and you're putting in a chronological thing where if someone comes on later with the same thing, you say, hold on, wait a minute. I was first,
Right.
and you're a patent attorney. And I
Right.
remember in school, I read a thing about, we always think of Alexander Graham Bell as the inventor of the telephone, all right? But supposedly there was someone else that was kind of fooling with the same thing. And I guess there again, it came down to who recorded or registered their claim to that invention. He had some type of an edge by, I don't know, I think it was a matter of days or whatever. But actually,
Yeah, that's actually very common because people working in technology, it's always kind of building on what people have done in the past. You have to
Yes.
come up with something that's novel and unobvious over what someone's done before you. But a lot of people theoretically, a lot of times work in that same area. So there are other people working on using different types of materials for filaments for Thomas Edison's light bulb and things like that. And so what you don't want to do is, a lot of people think, well, I can get patent pending by sending like a letter to myself, and that really won't work. You need to kind of
that would not hold up my
no,
head.
no, you need to
They used to
actually
call it, now this years ago, I'm talking like 40 years ago or 50 years ago. Someone told me, obviously wrong, that if you can't record or you don't go through the process, you do a certified letter return to yourself with your material in it. But what you're telling me, if I went to court with that wouldn't necessarily hold up.
no, and it just wouldn't be a good way of doing
Right.
it. You would want, because the cost is so, it's not extensive for doing a copyright.
Right.
Even with an attorney, it's a few $100s typically,
Sure.
so it's not a
Right.
big expenditure. So it's much more valuable just having that third party's hands and things like that, because they could make arguments that maybe you replicated, you used postage stamps or God knows what. It just wouldn't be worth the hassle to go to court with something like that. Where with the U.S. government, you've got them backing up. They've got record that you could take into court that proves when you filed and things like that. So there's a considerable advantage. You definitely get your
Right.
money's worth
by
on something
doing
like that.
that.
Right.
Kind of thinking back, there have been several well-known cases where authors, like I say, screenwriters, book authors, that type of thing, were involved in litigation from someone trying to plagiarize their stuff.
Right.
As far as the mechanics of defending your proprietary rights, your intellectual property rights, if I find that my material has been plagiarized and I come to someone like you that
Right.
is a copyright attorney, can you walk through kind of what the legal mechanical steps would be and really frankly the cost to defend my authorship of my proprietary stuff?
Right. I guess the real key is kind of explore with you as a client, because in order to have infringement, somebody has to have access to your work and actually copied your work. And it's got to be substantially similar to what you actually came up with and things
Now,
like
when you
that.
say similar, so we're clear, I think back, I guess it was Alex Haley, if we were talking about him.
Right.
And there was, that was a pretty big deal. Now, of course, this is back in the 70s, and we all remember the hit ABC miniseries Roots. Remember that?
Right. Oh, absolutely. It was
Right,
like
okay.
140 million people were watching it.
I mean, and I was one of them. Unfortunately, I was still going to school. I had a little black and white TV, but I did watch it.
Right.
But the thing is that Alex, of course, was known for that book, which was a bestseller book. But there was a claim. There was an allegation, which apparently was justified at some point. And I'd ask you to kind of do some research, which I think you had.
Right.
And it involved where when he wrote his book, maybe one day he had a writer's block. I know we've all had them. Well, instead of just waiting until, your head's clear or whatever, he decided wrongfully, apparently, because it was proven in court, that he actually plagiarized someone else's work. And he took that material, put it in his book, which went on to the teleplay, which became the miniseries. And I guess David Wolper Productions was involved in producing it. So whenever Alex was sued for plagiarism, it was kind of that blanket, everybody and the brother got sued kind of a thing. tell us about that, because I know you researched it. I know the kind of guy, you did your homework.
Right,
So
right. Absolutely. And there are actually 2 lawsuits because everyone, it was such a moneymaker that everyone
Sure.
kind of came out of the woodwork. And so the first one, the Courtlander case you're talking about, it was a gentleman, he actually had a book that kind of predated it, and it was kind of a well-respected book that came out earlier. And what happened is he was actually able to kind of pinpoint explicit actions, like certain phraseology that the slaves had that was an exact reproduction, things like that. And also there was actually testimony for someone who's a research assistant who gave a copy of the book, even though Alex Haley originally said he didn't have access. The student actually gave a copy of this book to Alex Haley and things like that. And so
that refuted his claim of being promoted.
And so the key to keep in mind there, it actually has to be, it's copyright's only based on the actual expression. So if you come up with something involving slaves and something involving, some of the various traditional things that slaves went through coming to America and things they went through, a lot of that wouldn't be considered protectable.
Generic, more or less, right?
Yeah, generic things. That's not a protectable element, but if it's very specific, in which Alex Haley ended up settling the lawsuit and things like that on that Courtlander case, Courtlander case that actually kind of, he made an acknowledgement of kind of a minor amount of plagiarism could have been that he could have had access and things like that. And so that kind of, and he was able to settle that. And there was another case where a Margaret Walker Alexander, and she was a professor at Jackson State, and she came up with, her great grandmother came up with a comparable story. It didn't really deal with starting in Africa, which is like 20% of Alex Haley's book, but she had kind of and a lot of the situations were similar. And so what the court did is kind of discount the things that is traditional, because there's so many books that predated that kind of reflected, things like singing certain songs, kind of the abuses and horrific things that occurred to slaves and things like that. That's a common thing that kind of permeated literature throughout the years. And so that wouldn't be necessarily out of her book. And so the court found against her actually and said, well, this is not this isn't a copyright infringement, because it was more, the real key is you cannot protect an idea. You can only protect a specific expression.
In other words, actually, in other words, if there's like a few words that are similar, but the overall thing is different, or vice versa, whatever combination of, we're actually talking about copying. I mean, just almost word for word.
Yeah, it's got to be the exact, you got to show it's substantially access to the copyright work and the exact expression. And in some cases, there could be words of, there are ways of saying things which are logical ways people would say things when reacting to a certain scenario. Then that's not going to be protectable either, because that's the same way most people would, 90% of the population would react. They'd say something comparable, and so that's not protectable also. So that's kind of an important thing. And so these things do happen. People, I've represented clients, they would be authors on Amazon. They would actually copy like maybe half the book and put it on Amazon. So they would take half the book, and I was able to, we're able to dissuade them from doing that, but it was kind of, they sold it for half the price and things like that, and they thought that was acceptable.
Right.
Fortunately, I was able to convince them that it was not acceptable.
Well, they're exposing themselves to undue litigation.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But these things do happen, and especially when something is popular. Let's say that as Roots was like the, like the late 70s, early 80s, it was like the miniseries between the book and everything else, and so it was extraordinarily famous. And it goes without saying that people would come out on something like that, definitely.
Right. Well, one thing I just to add to what you're saying, if you've ever tried to approach a studio or producer or whatever, and they say, we do not accept unsolicited material, and you're thinking, boy, what a such and such. I've used colorful words to describe those people.
Right.
But really, if you think about it, the position that they're in, these are obviously very successful people in the television or film production business. And while they would love to entertain something, the procedure in Hollywood, just to give our folks out there listening a little heads up, there's an old saying that says, to get an agent, you have to work. Well, to work, you have to have an agent. someone that's going to represent you to those studios or those producers.
Right.
Those folks have got a lot at stake. They're worth a lot of money, and to protect themselves, they put out these kind of a disclaimer, I guess would be the term, where they just absolutely refuse to take unsolicited material.
Right. And that goes across a lot of industries, because when I worked at Caterpillar, they would not accept invention disclosures
exactly.
from
Same
people
thing.
across the thing, just because they have a huge R&D department. They're coming up with thousands of ideas at any one time, and they would be totally pure and they wouldn't think about it, but it could hit, and Caterpillar would get stuff from people in prisons and who knows where, coming up with an idea for a
Just for the
wheel.
record, I was never in prison. The man was dead before I got there. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. All right.
No, I'm just saying they would get solicitations from all over. And so that they would do nothing wrong, but they had to kind of send out a
Right.
thing where saying we're not going to accept that, just because inadvertently something could happen. It's the same way with some of the top movie studios and things like that. They just don't, if they had it wide open, then they could solicit a lot of different ideas, and it might hit on something that they might have had in the works and all that. And next thing you know, they're losing out. And so all the profits are gone from a major work just because it resembles something, and just the hassle of having to litigate with that. So I totally understand where they're coming
Right.
from on that.
Well, another thing that's interesting, when we look at like films that have made money, their profits are their sales, I guess, their net revenue, gross revenue, is normally reflected in domestic sales and of course international grosses and so forth. How in the world do they possibly control themselves? We hear a lot about pirating and so forth, where I guess unscrupulous people, underworld mobs, organized crime, whatever, will actually go into a theater with now I guess a camcorder and record the whole thing, go back and they'll pirate it, do some editing and so forth. How in the world do you catch those people, or how do you recoup any kind of loss that may occur from that?
It's very challenging, but a lot of times you can kind of hunt them down. A lot of times they go overseas, and so you have to have kind of investigative groups. So it's a matter of kind of having connections to different investigative groups and kind of looking for connections where you'd have jurisdiction over them and things like that. But they do kind of cover their tracks. So there's more and more things that kind of prohibit that. A lot of times movie studios, they put different things that would protect that, just the same way like Getty Photos actually puts on the internet. They put their watermark
Right.
and things like that.
Yeah.
And so anyone copying that type of material, they can track it. You can put it on for them, you think is an innocuous thing, and they'll knock on your door and say, well, where's my royalty rate?
Right.
My royalty for that.
Right.
And so that does happen on a regular basis. And so
Sure.
there's ways of kind of prohibiting that. And reputable movie distribution places would not show things like that. And so it's a matter of kind of finding that website and kind of shutting that down. And there are provisions where you can actually shut those websites down and things like that. And so that does happen. I've been involved in scenarios like that, but it's just a matter of doing the research. You
Sure.
kind of track it out, figure out exactly where that website's coming from, who's behind it, what the entity, who's the true entity behind that, and doing some research, due diligence on that.
Sure.
But it's but yeah, that's kind of a real key, is to make sure like who you're doing business with too. It goes back to that whole thing, is do businesses with reputable entities, do a little due diligence up front, because any type of relationship, any kind of licensing deal, the key is you have to have a good working relationship. You have to kind of trust that person. And so you want to make sure that they're capable of do that. So I would even recommend like a Duns Bradstreet report, just to make sure you're dealing with someone who's, you can have the world's greatest licensing deal of your property, and it could be all for naught because that person might only have 50 cents in the bank,
Right.
and $8 million in debt, and it
Sure.
wouldn't be worth anything.
Right. They're judgment proof, as we say in the business.
Oh,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. So you just have to do some research up front who you're doing business with.
One of the cases that I think we talked about too when we discussed this on the phone involved a couple of people. The well-known,
Right.
I guess, Art Buchholz, who has since passed away. If people were familiar with Art Buchholz, he was I guess a newspaper guy is what he was primarily.
Right.
And like everyone else, he had a thought or whatever, And he put together this incredible theory about this little African prince that grew up and decided that he wanted to go to America and come to understand and love and appreciate all that was America. And of course, his father was worried about how he would be received and protected, so he sent someone with him. And it just so happened that he took this concept to then Paramount, and he said, this concept, and he did what we call a treatment, a synopsis of what came down to. And he actually had titled it called Coming to America. Now, if that happens to sound familiar to you, there was a movie by the same name with a African-American comedic actor by the name of Eddie Murphy that did precisely the same thing. Now, Art said, wait a minute. I showed Paramount this and they rejected it. And then like 2 years later, here it is, a major box office hit. I mean, they made a ton of money off of it. Okay. So as far as the position, now, I don't think Eddie had anything to do with plagiarizing. I don't think there was a thing that he did wrong, but he was caught up in this because obviously he was the star. He was enjoined in the lawsuit, into the litigation.
Right.
My understanding, I think you researched it a little bit, didn't you?
Right. Yeah, that's correct.
It.
Yeah, and he had like an option on it and things like that. And like with a lot of movie deals that you're familiar with and things like that. There's so many moving parts, and you have to put everything together between the director and get the cast, the soundtrack, and all that kind of. And it kind of fell apart at one point. It was getting really close. And then Eddie Murphy, it wasn't the same treatment. He gets credit, and there's like 2 other co-writers and things like that who got credit for it and things like that. And so there's a lot of debate and things like that. There's like John Landis kind of weighed in. He didn't think it was similar to it. He always felt it was different. It was a similar concept, I guess, based on the original screenplay. The African prince gets dethroned. He actually goes on welfare and ends up marrying the woman, things like that. So there's some real plot deviations, and so it's kind of. But
they
actually,
settled it. I think they.
They ended up prevailing. They actually ended up prevailing. Our Buckwald did, but then the key is it was based on kind of the net gross. And just like in the James Garner case against Universal and things like that, net gross is something as a budding artist, you need to really be careful and have your attorney involved, because everyone likes to put into net gross all the expenses of the studio. And so, most studios have millions and millions of dollars in other expenses, and they're able to creatively kind of alter that so it ends up
so you mean it's kind of like 2 + 2 is wherever you want it to be? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, basically they were making $288 million, which would have been about back in the day would be a huge box office win. It's a very successful movie, and they ended up making no money, and so they ended up, I believe, settling for like $900,000 eventually. But that's an issue, and they had a BATFIN case which didn't throw that net case out. But my advice, so I cannot emphasize strongly enough, if you have a license agreement where there is a net net profit versus some kind of gross value, you need to kind of have your attorney look at that, because you need to make sure that it's tied into more of a gross sales scenario, and whatever is a net, it has to be something that could be measured, and that's really tied into actually your work, and you're not paying for the 30 losing movies or TV shows. You're only getting the costs that are apportioned to yours, and that can be verified by your own CPA, and you've got the rights to go in there and look at that. And so that's an excellent point and things like that. And so that's what kind of prevailed. And so it kind of brings up the excellent point is you always need to make sure, just don't sign these deals when you think you're getting close to a big Hollywood deal, because you can really end up with, and Art Buchwald's he was a kind of a humorous columnist. He had a nationwide syndication, and he was, I remember reading his columns all the time growing up, and he was very funny, and it was really good. And so if someone with his connections has to have this kind of a struggle, if you're just starting out in the business,
I can imagine what a little guy. Now, to your point, we all remember the first Rocky with Sylvester Stallone. Now, obviously, he was a struggling young actor, and he had the screenplay for this guy from the hood, if you will, that
Right.
wants to box his way out of the hood, which you never hear anybody box themselves out of the suburbs, just to tell you that. Okay, all right. But at any rate, he had this concept. He took it to this producer, and they made the film. And he said, the only way you're going to make that is a 5-minute. Of course, he was on. Now, what was that, like 40 years ago?
Right.
And my understanding is, now this is according to Sylvester Stallone, he's still waiting to get his first buck of profit from that movie. Yeah. Needless to say, like you say, creative accounting, right? Now, isn't that what you're talking about? I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, and the Sylvester Stallone, he was at the point where they were just kind of, he didn't have any money at all, and they were going to take everything kind of away from him and just kind of and take it from him and things like that. So actually, I was listening to a podcast. He actually ended up living on, I think, Henry Winkler's couch.
Yes.
And so he ended up kind of doing that, and he was able to actually, be the director and kind of really launched his career and things like that. But he held out. He kind of waited. He could have signed a deal where they could have taken it all away from him for literally no money, and he wouldn't have credit, and where he actually got to be the director and kind of launched like one of the finest careers in all of Hollywood, just because he kind of had to stay the course. But he did have to stay the course, and so it just shows you and so he just really did an outstanding job.
I want to ask you real quick. There's going to be two things. First off, how many years does a copyright is enforced in effect? What I mean, if someone copyrights something, how long do they hold, or is it for their signs or errors?
Right.
Real quick.
If it's an individual, it's 70 years for the life of that person. You have the rights to. And if it's work made for hire, which means it's part of a corporation, basically, or if it's part of like an anonymous or something where it's not under your name per se, then you get kind of a combination. It's either 95 years from the date of first publication or 120 years from the date of creation,
Okay.
whichever is the shortest period of time.
That's great. Everybody would like to know. Real quick, with the couple of minutes we have left, would you please mention your corporate name, your firm's name, the website, phone number, email address, real quick? Can you give that to us?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks so much, Stacey.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm with McGee, Voorhees, and Cease of Counsel. My name again is Kevin Kircher, Kercher. My website is at IPMBS. So if you think of McKee, Voorhees, and Cease, it's IP, intellectual property in front of it, IPMBS.com. And my email address is kevin.kircher@IPMBS.com. And my phone number is area code 515-288-3667, and it's extension 5941.
Great. Well, Kevin, I want to appreciate you coming in today and sharing your vast amount of knowledge about the industry with us. And I think you've given a good insight to really the workings of the legalities connected with our business. And certainly the little guys like us are dependent upon nice people like you to get us through the rough waters of so forth. So thank you very, very much for being with us. And we'd like to have you come back again whenever certain things develop and happen and so forth, and talk about cases that may come up in the future. So
that sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Stacey. This has just truly been an honor and privilege, and I deeply appreciate you. You're just a wonderful person, and you're really a knowledgeable guy, and I really enjoyed it.
well,
And I'm always free to, whenever you would like me to appear again, I would absolutely
we'll
thrilled.
do that for sure. I would think that probably in the next 2 years we're going to see a greater change in the business from theatrical to streaming and so forth. So anyway, thank you again for listening to Movies and More. I'm Stacey Hollis, and y'all remember to take your mama to church on Sunday. So thank you again.